Disclaimer.
AG here. When a president announces he's building a dream military, you'd expect someone to check if the materials to build it actually exist. Turns out nobody did that math, and now I'm watching the silver market break in real time while Wall Street pretends everything's fine. On January 8th, 2026, just 5 days ago, President Trump posted on Truth Social what might be the most ambitious military expansion announcement in American history. He called it the Dream Military Initiative, proposing a defense budget of $1.5 trillion for fiscal year 2027. That's not a typo. That's a 66% increase over the current $901 billion defense budget that Congress just authorized for 2026. Trump wrote that this would allow America to build the military we have long been entitled to and keep us safe and secure, regardless of foe. Defense stocks initially surged on the news. Analysts debated funding mechanisms and geopolitical strategy. Cable news covered the political implications. But here's what nobody asked in those 5 days of coverage. What does building the most technologically advanced military in human history actually require in terms of raw materials? The answer is silver, and Trump's announcement just triggered the biggest supply crisis in modern commodity history. Let me show you what's already happening as a direct result of this decision. Physical silver bars are now trading for $130 per ounce in Tokyo and Dubai, while the paper contracts on Comex in New York show 76. That's not a typo. That's a 54 gap between what people pay for real metal they can hold versus what our official exchanges claim silver is worth. According to the World Gold Council's January 2026 market report, this represents the largest disconnect between physical and paper prices in precious metals history. This is not a pricing inefficiency or regional premium. This is evidence that Trump's military buildup has already broken the silver supply system, and most Americans have no idea it's happening. You might be wondering why military spending would affect a metal most people associate with jewelry and coins. Let me connect the dots in a way that should make every investor sit up and take notice. Every guidance system, every semiconductor chip, every solar panel on military satellites, every advanced radar array, every secure communications device our military depends on requires silver because of its unmatched electrical and thermal conductivity. We're not talking about jewelry or collectible coins here. We're talking about the one metal that makes modern warfare technology physically possible, and Trump just ordered the Pentagon to build systems that will consume silver on a scale we've never seen. The F-35 fighter jet alone contains hundreds of chips that require silver in their production, and the expanded military plans call for accelerated production of these aircraft, along with new naval vessels, hypersonic missiles, and the ambitious Golden Dome missile defense system that would blanket our country with satellite networks and ground-based interceptors. Each one of these systems is a silver-eating machine. Here's where Trump's announcement created a perfect storm that is now breaking commodity markets in real time. The administration has designated Intel a national champion in semiconductor manufacturing, with the U.S. government taking a 9.9% equity stake in the company. According to the Department of Commerce press release, this was not just financial support. This was a strategic partnership to ensure American chips would power American military systems without depending on foreign suppliers. Intel's new fabrication facilities in Arizona, Ohio, and New Mexico are producing the 18A chip node, representing the cutting edge of semiconductor technology, and these advanced chips require significantly more silver in their manufacturing process than previous generations. We're talking about etching circuits measured in nanometers onto silicon wafers, a process that demands silver's unique properties. Pop quiz. Who's the world's largest refiner and exporter of silver? If you guessed China, you're paying attention to supply chains in ways most investors aren't. On January 1st, 2026, just 1 week before Trump's announcement, China implemented comprehensive export restrictions on silver and several other critical metals, citing national security concerns and the need to secure domestic supply for their own technological ambitions. The Ministry of Commerce announcement was brief and technical, but the implications are staggering. China controls roughly 65% of global refined silver supply, and they just cut off access to most of it for buyers outside their sphere of influence. Think about the timing here. China locks down 65% of global silver supply, and 1 week later, Trump announces a massive military buildup requiring unprecedented amounts of silver for semiconductors and defense systems. Either this is the most unfortunate coincidence in commodity market history, or China saw what was coming and moved first to weaponize their control over critical material supply chains. Have you checked the Comex silver inventory numbers lately? If you're like most people, you probably haven't because warehouse inventory reports sound boring and technical. But these numbers tell a story that should alarm anyone who understands basic supply and demand. Comex registered silver inventory, that's the physical metal actually available for delivery against futures contracts, has crashed by 70% since 2020. We went from roughly 150 million ounces sitting in registered vaults to just 45 million ounces today, according to CME Group's official inventory reports. That's not a gradual decline. That is a systematic draining of physical metal from the exchange that is supposed to be the world's pricing mechanism for silver. December 2025 just set a record that flew under the radar of mainstream financial news. Traders demanded delivery of 62.8 million ounces of physical silver through Comex contracts. For context, a typical month might see 10 to 15 million ounces delivered. This was not speculative trading or paper shuffling. This was people and institutions saying, I want the actual metal, not a promise to deliver metal later. The CME delivery reports show something even more revealing. JP Morgan handled 99% of these delivery stops, meaning JP Morgan's house account was on the receiving end of almost all that physical silver. When the largest bank in America is aggressively accumulating physical metal while inventory at our official exchange drops to historic lows, that's not random market activity. That's institutions positioning for something they see coming that retail investors haven't figured out yet. Let me paint you a scenario to make this concrete. Imagine you're planning a vacation to Japan in 6 months. You could buy yen today at the current exchange rate, or you could wait and buy them later. Now imagine that people buying yen for immediate delivery are paying 70% more than the official price quoted for future delivery. That would tell you something fundamental is broken. Either the official price is fiction, or there is a shortage of actual yen available right now. That's exactly what's happening in silver. The spot price, what you pay for immediate delivery of physical metal, is trading at massive premiums to the futures price in markets outside U.S. exchanges. In commodities markets, this is called backwardation, and it's a classic warning signal that physical supply is so tight that people will pay extra to get metal today rather than wait for promised delivery tomorrow. The first 3 trading days of January 2026 have already seen another 18 million ounces delivered through Comex contracts, continuing the relentless drain on registered inventory. At this pace, according to analysis from precious metals research firm Metals Focus, the exchange could run out of deliverable silver within months. What happens then? In commodity markets, when an exchange can't deliver physical goods against contracts, they declare force majeure, a fancy legal term that means we're settling your contract in cash instead of metal because we don't have the metal. That's not a theoretical risk. That's the path we're currently on based on simple math of inventory versus delivery demand. Here's what makes this situation different from typical commodity shortages. Oil can be drilled, wheat can be planted, even copper can be mined faster if prices rise enough to justify new production. Silver mining is uniquely constrained because 70% of silver comes as a byproduct of mining other metals, like zinc, lead, and copper. You can't just mine more silver in response to higher prices. The primary mining happens when companies dig for other metals, and silver comes along for the ride. The Silver Institute's 2025 World Silver Survey confirms that primary silver mine production has been essentially flat for the past 5 years, despite prices doubling from their 2020 lows. The supply response that economic theory predicts simply isn't coming. Meanwhile, our military-industrial complex just received a $1.5 trillion annual budget, focused heavily on technology-intensive systems. Intel just became a government-backed national champion with massive fabrication expansion. China just locked down 65% of refined supply. And the exchange that's supposed to provide price discovery and reliable delivery is watching its physical inventory evaporate, while paper contracts still trade as if everything is normal. These are not separate stories. This is one story with multiple players moving in ways that create a supply-demand imbalance unlike anything we've seen in modern commodity markets. What if I told you that the gap between physical and paper prices has already told us the outcome of this story? Markets are forward-looking mechanisms. When physical silver in major trading centers commands a 70% premium over Comex futures, the market is screaming that the paper price is fiction and the physical shortage is already here. The only people who haven't gotten the message yet are retail investors still watching Comex prices on their financial apps, thinking they understand what silver is actually worth. The insiders, the banks, the institutions with access to real-time delivery data and global supply chains, they're already acting on information that hasn't filtered down to everyday investors yet. This is the setup, the hidden mechanism that Trump's announcement set in motion just 5 days ago. A president decided to build the most technologically advanced military in history without anyone calculating whether the physical materials to build it actually exist in sufficient quantities. China had already locked down 65% of global silver supply a week earlier. Comex inventories were already at historic lows, and institutional buyers were already draining physical metal. Then Trump announced, a 1.5 trillion military budget that will consume silver on a scale we've never seen, a perfect storm of government policy, international supply restrictions, institutional accumulation, and market structure dysfunction that's pushing toward an inevitable conclusion. The question is not whether the paper silver market can continue functioning as designed. The math says it can't. The question is how much time you have to understand what's happening and position yourself accordingly before the system breaks completely and physical silver becomes unavailable at any price for ordinary investors. The next part of this story reveals exactly how we got to this breaking point, with evidence from exchange data, government contracts, and the actual technology driving unprecedented industrial demand for silver that most people don't realize exists. Let me show you exactly why Trump's dream military announcement just broke the silver supply chain in ways that can't be fixed with higher prices or increased mining. This isn't speculation or theory. This is verifiable evidence from semiconductor production data, Comex delivery reports, and the actual technology specifications of the weapon systems Trump wants to build. When you understand what these systems require and where the materials come from, the conclusion becomes unavoidable. Start with Intel, because this is where national security policy collides with physics and chemistry in ways that create unavoidable material constraints. The Commerce Department designated Intel as a national champion, with a 9.9% government equity stake specifically to ensure American chips power American military systems. Intel's fabrication facilities in Arizona, Ohio, and New Mexico are now producing the 18A chip node, which represents 3 nanometer process technology. To put that in perspective, we're etching circuits onto silicon wafers where the features are roughly 15 atoms wide. At that scale, the electrical properties of every material matter enormously, and silver's conductivity becomes non-negotiable for certain applications. Here's what the semiconductor industry does not advertise widely, but every engineer knows. Advanced chips require more silver than older generations, not less. Each wafer uses silver in photovoltaic cells that power certain manufacturing steps, in conductive pastes, and adhesives in lead frames that connect the chip to its package, and in specialized alloys used for high reliability connections. According to the Silver Institute's industrial demand reports, semiconductor packaging alone consumes between 1,200 and 1,500 metric tons of silver annually under normal production volumes. That's roughly 38 to 48 million ounces per year for the entire global semiconductor industry at current production levels. Now, factor in what Trump's military expansion actually means in concrete terms. The F-35 fighter jet, which Trump's budget accelerates production of, contains over 300,000 lines of software code and hundreds of individual processors, handling everything from helmet-mounted displays to radar systems, to weapons targeting, to flight control surfaces. Each one of those processors requires silver in its manufacturing. Each F-35 costs roughly $80 million and contains more computing power than the Apollo program used to put humans on the moon. We're not talking about a handful of chips here. We're talking about distributed processing networks inside a single aircraft, and Trump wants to accelerate production of these jets along with expanding pilot training programs and maintenance capabilities. But the F-35 is just one system. Let's talk about the Golden Dome missile defense initiative that Trump has championed as a signature achievement of his military modernization. The system would create a layered defense network combining satellite sensors, ground-based radars, sea-based interceptors, and land-based missile batteries, all coordinated through real-time data links. The Space Force component alone requires hundreds of satellites, each containing solar panels that use silver, communications arrays that use silver, and radiation-hardened electronics that use silver compounds to survive the harsh space environment. According to Department of Defense procurement documents, a single military-grade satellite can contain anywhere from 30 to 100 kilograms of silver, depending on its mission profile and power requirements. If Golden Dome requires 500 satellites in its full deployment, that's 15 to 50 metric tons of silver just for the space component, not counting the ground systems. Then there's the new battleship class that defense analysts have been discussing since Trump's announcement. Modern naval vessels are floating computer networks. The Aegis combat system that coordinates air defense on current destroyers processes millions of data points per second from dozens of sensors. Expanding that to larger vessels with greater range and capability means more processors, more radar arrays, more communications equipment, all requiring silver for the electrical connections that can't fail in combat conditions. Salt water, extreme temperatures, constant vibration. Military electronics operate in environments where consumer-grade components would fail immediately, which is why defense contractors specify silver-based solutions, even when cheaper alternatives exist for civilian applications. You want proof that insiders understand what's coming? Look at what's happening on Comex right now, not what happened months ago. The first 3 trading days of January 2026, immediately following Trump's announcement, saw delivery demands for 18 million ounces of physical silver. That's on top of December's record 62.8 million ounces. We're watching the largest physical delivery demands in Comex history happening right now, in real time, as industrial buyers and financial institutions rush to secure metal before the shortage becomes obvious to retail investors. The CME Group delivery reports show JP Morgan continues to dominate the stops, taking delivery of the vast majority of physical metal. When the largest bank in America is this aggressive about accumulating physical silver immediately after a major defense spending announcement, that tells you their analysts have done the same math we're doing and reached the same conclusion. Here's where the market structure reveals the severity of the shortage. In normal commodity markets, the futures price trades slightly above the spot price because of carrying costs, storage, insurance, financing. That relationship is called contango, and it's what you expect when physical supply is adequate. But silver markets are now in backwardation, meaning spot prices exceed futures prices. Traders are paying a premium for immediate delivery compared to promised future delivery. That's the market screaming that physical metal available today is worth more than promises of metal tomorrow. According to Metals Focus research, sustained backwardation in commodity markets historically precedes defaults or force majeure declarations when exchanges can't deliver physical goods against contracts. The backwardation we're seeing isn't small or temporary. In major trading centers outside U.S. exchange control, physical silver commands premiums of 50 to 70% over Comex futures prices. That's not a functioning market. That's a market. In the process of breaking where paper claims far exceed physical supply, and the price discovery mechanism has fractured between exchanges that still pretend everything is normal and physical markets that reflect actual scarcity. Let me connect this back to Trump's specific military initiatives, because the demand is theoretical or future dated. The administration has already ordered military operations that require immediate deployment of silver-intensive systems. The Venezuela operation that Trump launched to capture Nicolas Maduro involves naval vessels, aircraft, surveillance systems, and secure communications all operating simultaneously in a combat environment. Each Tomahawk cruise missile uses GPS guidance with silver-containing electronics. Each surveillance drone uses cameras and communications gear with silver connections. Each encrypted radio uses silver-plated contacts to ensure signal integrity under battlefield conditions. This isn't hypothetical future demand. This is current operational demand happening right now, and it's just the beginning of what Trump's expanded military posture requires. The Golden Dome system, if fully implemented, would require thousands of interceptor missiles, each with its own guidance system, each with processors and sensors that use silver. The ground-based radar arrays would use silver-plated waveguides to minimize signal loss. The data centers processing all this information would use servers with silver-based thermal interface materials to prevent overheating. When you add up all the components across all the systems, Trump has announced the industrial silver demand from military applications alone could exceed the entire current annual mine supply of silver, which, according to the Silver Institute's 2025 World Silver Survey, was approximately 822 million ounces. But here's the constraint that makes this different from every other commodity squeeze in modern history. You can't just mine more silver in response to higher prices. Roughly 70% of silver production comes as a byproduct of mining other metals like zinc, lead, and copper. Primary silver mines contribute only 30% of global supply. That means silver production is fundamentally constrained by the economics of base metal mining, not by silver prices. If zinc prices are low, zinc mines slow down or shut down, and silver production drops as a consequence, regardless of how high silver prices go. The supply response that economic theory predicts for most commodities simply does not work for silver because of this byproduct mining structure. China understood this constraint, which is why their January 1 export restrictions were so strategically timed. They control 65% of global refined silver, not because they mine 65% of the ore, but because they have built the refining capacity to process ore from around the world and turn it into the high purity silver that industry requires. Even if you have raw ore, if you can't refine it to 99.9% purity or higher, you can't use it in semiconductors or advanced electronics. China has created a choke point in the supply chain that can't be quickly bypassed, and they activated that choke point 1 week before Trump announced the largest military expansion in American history. That's not coincidence. That's strategic resource control executed with precision timing. The proof is in the numbers, the delivery data, the backwardation structure, and the technology specifications of the systems Trump wants to build. This isn't a conspiracy theory or market manipulation. This is supply and demand at the most fundamental level, with verifiable evidence that the supply system is already breaking under demand that's about to multiply. The next part of this story reveals exactly how much worse this gets, with specific price targets, timeline projections, and the mathematical calculation that shows why the current system cannot survive the next 6 months. Let me show you the math that Wall Street does not want published in a simple breakdown that anyone can verify. This isn't complex financial modeling or speculative projection. This is basic arithmetic applied to verified supply and demand numbers. And the conclusion is unavoidable once you see it clearly. The silver market is heading toward a mathematical endpoint where the current system must break, and we can calculate approximately when and at what price that breaking point arrives. Start with the supply side, because that's where the constraint exists. Global silver mine production in 2025 was approximately 822 million ounces, according to the Silver Institute as annual survey. That's total production from all sources worldwide, both primary mines and byproduct production from base metal operations. China's January 1st export restrictions didn't reduce mining, but they removed access to roughly 65% of refined silver supply for buyers outside China's approved list. That means the available supply for American industrial users, European manufacturers, and global investors just dropped by more than 500 million ounces annually. We're now competing for roughly 300 to 350 million ounces of refined silver in accessible markets, while demand from existing industrial applications, solar panels, and investment continues at previous levels. Now add Trump's military expansion on top of that constrained supply base. Semiconductor packaging for chips currently consumes 1,200 to 1,500 metric tons annually, which translates to roughly 38 to 48 million ounces. Intel's expansion as a national champion with government-backed production increases means more chips specifically for military applications. Industry analysts project that AI chip production and military electronics combined could push semiconductor silver demand up 15 to 20% over the next 18 months. That adds another 7 to 10 million ounces of annual demand just from the chip sector. The Golden Dome missile defense system, if implemented on the timeline Trump's advisors have suggested, requires 15 to 50 metric tons just for the satellite network, plus ground-based systems. New battleships, accelerated F-35 production, hypersonic missile programs, and the Venezuela operation happening right now all add incremental demand that did not exist in previous defense budgets. Here's where the math becomes brutal and unavoidable. Industrial silver demand was already exceeding mine supply before Trump's announcement. The Silver Institute's 2025 data shows industrial applications consumed roughly 550 million ounces, while mine production delivered 802 million ounces, leaving approximately 270 million ounces for investment demand and the modest amount that goes into jewelry and silverware. But that calculation assumed access to Chinese refined supply. Remove China is 65%, and suddenly we have 300 to 350 million ounces of accessible supply trying to serve 550 million ounces of industrial demand, plus whatever investment demand exists. The deficit is immediate and severe, somewhere between 200 and 250 million ounces annually at current demand levels. Now add a 15 to 20% increased demand for military and AI expansion, and the deficit grows to 280 to 320 million ounces per year. You cannot run a 300 million ounce annual deficit in a market where total accessible supply is only 350 million ounces. The math doesn't work. Something has to give, and in commodity markets, what gives is price. When physical supply is genuinely short relative to demand, prices rise until demand is destroyed or new supply emerges. But we've already established that silver supply can't respond quickly to higher prices because of byproduct mining constraints. That means price has to rise high enough to destroy industrial demand, which means electronics manufacturers, solar panel producers, and defense contractors have to either find substitutes that don't exist for certain applications or reduce production. Neither option happens quickly or easily. Bank of America's commodity research team published analysis in late 2025, projecting silver prices could reach $135 to $300 per ounce as physical shortages force price discovery away from manipulated paper markets. That wasn't a speculative bull case or promotional material from precious metals dealers. That was one of America's largest banks with access to industrial clients, supply chain data, and delivery logistics, telling institutional investors that current prices are unsustainable given supply-demand fundamentals. When establishment financial institutions start publishing triple-digit silver price targets, they're not trying to create FOMO among retail investors. They're warning their large clients to position accordingly because the current system is breaking. The Comex situation provides the timeline for when this breaking becomes visible to everyone. Registered silver inventory has dropped to roughly 45 million ounces from 150 million ounces in 2020. January 2026 has already seen 18 million ounces delivered in the first 3 trading days following Trump's announcement. If that pace continues, registered inventory could be completely drained within 60 to 90 days. What happens when Comex runs out of physical silver, but still has open futures contracts that require delivery? The exchange declares force majeure, which is legal language that says We're settling your contracts in cash instead of metal because we don't have the metal to deliver. That's not a technical default in the sense of bankruptcy, but it is a functional admission that the paper market has decoupled from physical reality and can no longer fulfill its core function of enabling physical delivery. Metals. Focus, a precious metals research firm that advises mining companies and central banks, has stated publicly that force majeure at Comex could occur within Q1 or Q2 of 2026 if current delivery demands continue. That's not fear-mongering. That's professional analysts watching warehouse receipts and delivery obligations and doing basic math about how long the physical metal lasts at current drain rates. We're potentially weeks, not months, from a situation where the world's primary silver pricing mechanism admits it cannot deliver physical metal against contracts. Think about what happens to silver prices when Comex declares force majeure. Every industrial buyer who thought they had hedged their silver needs through futures contracts suddenly realizes those hedges are worthless if they can't get physical delivery. Every investor who owns paper silver through ETFs or unallocated accounts suddenly questions whether their claims are backed by real metal or just ledger entries. The scramble for physical silver would make the current 70% premiums in Tokyo and Dubai look modest. According to trading desk sources who spoke to metals publications in late December, some industrial buyers are already paying 100% premiums over Comex spot prices for guaranteed physical delivery of large orders, effectively paying $150 per ounce for silver, while the official exchange quote shows $76. Here's the calculation that should concern every American investor who isn't positioned for this outcome. You're now competing for physical silver against a $1.5 trillion military-industrial complex that has effectively unlimited purchasing power and considers silver a strategic material essential to national security. You're competing against Intel with government backing and production mandates. You're competing against solar panel manufacturers trying to meet renewable energy targets. You're competing against electronics companies that need silver to make products that generate their revenue. And you're competing in a market where 65% of refined supply just disappeared behind Chinese export controls. The window to acquire physical silver at anywhere near current prices is closing in real time. Once Comex issues force majeure, once the mainstream financial media finally reports that paper claims vastly exceed physical metal, once industrial buyers and large investors finish securing their positions, physical silver will simply disappear from public markets. You'll still be able to buy paper claims, ETF shares, futures contracts, but actually getting delivery of real metal that you can hold will become either prohibitively expensive or effectively impossible for regular investors. This isn't fear or panic. This is mathematical inevitability based on verified supply constraints, documented demand increases, and observable market behavior. Trump's dream military announcement 5 days ago accelerated a process that was already underway. China's export restrictions removed the safety valve that might have absorbed the demand increase. Comex's draining inventory provides the countdown clock to when the paper market breaks. And the 70% premiums already visible in physical markets outside U.S. exchange control show you what silver is actually worth when people need real metal rather than paper promises. The choice is straightforward. You can continue trusting that paper markets accurately reflect physical reality, despite all evidence to the contrary. Or you can recognize that we're watching a commodity supply crisis unfold in real time with a clearly visible timeline and calculable price targets. The math says current prices are unsustainable. The delivery data says the system is breaking now, not later. The premium structure says physical metal is already worth far more than official quotes suggest. What you do with that information determines whether you're holding real ounces or worthless promises when Comex declares force majeure and the price discovery mechanism fractures permanently. The countdown has already started. 5 days ago, Trump made an announcement without checking if the materials exist to fulfill it. Now we're all dealing with the consequences of that oversight, and the clock is ticking.